The Song of the Sail. There's an old urban legend that tells of two married slaves, Betsy and Elick. Their story is recorded in an 1883 article in a Lawrenceville, Georgia newspaper called the Gwinnett Herald. In this article, Judge Richard D. Wynn confessed his part in sentencing Elick to death by hanging for killing his master for trying to attack his wife Betsy. The judge described their master, Colonel James Austin, as a drunk. One night in 1848, Colonel James Austin burst into his kitchen to find Betsy and her husband working. Without regard for her husband, Colonel Austin grabbed Betsy in an attempt to pleasure himself. Now, Betsy was with child with Elick's baby, so Elick made the decision to fight, pulling Colonel Austin off his pregnant wife. Now, of course, this enraged Colonel Austin, and he drew the sword he was known to carry around town and began chasing Elick all around the room. Elick ran, picking up things to throw at his master in an attempt to sober him up. He eventually climbed the cabin to the loft in order to avoid the colonel, but the colonel followed him and they continued to fight. In self-defense, Elick stabs his master 7 times and the colonel falls to his death to the main floor of the cabin. When Elick realized that he had killed his master, his wife Betsy begged him, she pleaded with him to run, but he decided not to run. He figured he should tell the truth about it being self-defense, and he would have a better chance at surviving than if he got caught running. Elick went to the courthouse to relay the details of what happened, telling the sheriff of his struggle with Colonel Austin and how the colonel ultimately was killed in self-defense. Elick was placed under arrest, and when he went before the judge, he was sentenced to hang. Elick was dismayed at his circumstances. Somehow, he really believed that if he told the truth about it being self-defense, that he would have been cleared of any wrongdoing. After all, everyone in town knew of Colonel Austin's drinking and how he could become belligerent when he had too much to drink, which was often. There had been other reports of him behaving poorly towards other women, so Elick felt he had a pretty good shot. After his sentencing, while he was awaiting his fate to be hung, Elick was so sorrowful. He felt that he had let his wife down and that he hadn't protected her at all. Today, if you were to visit the jail in Lawrenceville, Georgia, you would see indentions in the cell walls where Elick was kept. It is said that he tried to carve his way to freedom back to his beloved Betsy. People report that if you touch the walls of the cell, that a deep feeling of sadness will overtake you. Some report that if they sing the same mournful song that Elick sang to his wife, then you could hear a voice that is said to be Elick's voice, singing with them. Betsy, will you meet me? Betsy, will you meet me? Betsy, will you meet me in heaven above? Goes the song. Now, normally, that is the end of this story. But I always want to know what happened after. I know that old Negro songs often have coded messages, so I did some digging. What I found out is that there was a conversation between Elick and Betsy before he went to turn himself in. They talked about what may come of Betsy and their child if he wasn't there to protect her, and made the decision to do one last job for old Master Colonel. I told you that Betsy worked as a cook, but Elick, well, he was actually Master Colonel's driver, and it was not uncommon for him to deliver and pick up packages for the colonel in town. So before turning himself in, he went to deliver one last package that was being mailed to Grand Haven, Michigan. The mail clerk told him that due to the late hour, the package would not leave for another 2 days when the train came through next. Elick told him that would be fine. Elick and Betsy decided that if things didn't go well, that they would finally make their way north to this town called Grand Haven, Michigan. Elick had heard of all the black free town. Elick had heard of this all free black town in Grand Haven from the buzz around town. But because he wasn't sure of his fate, he finally had the courage to do what he could to get Betsy to freedom. He nailed Betsy in a box with a few days of rations and plastic to conceal when she had to relieve herself. He placed all his faith in an address he had been given by a man in town who promised that there were those in Grand Haven that would help runaway slaves. His last decision as a loving husband would be to help Betsy to freedom or die trying. When he learned of his fate, he sat in that jail cell and sang out as loud as he could so Betsy could hear him in the box across the way. The scratch marks that can be seen in the walls of the cell today was Elick trying to scratch and claw his way to his Betsy just across the way. If he could get out, he thought, he would find a way to meet Betsy in the place he was referring to in his song as heaven. Heaven is a code word for Grand Haven. Elick was hanged and never made it to Grand Haven, but the sound of his voice in the song suggests he did make it to heaven. And Betsy, she made it to Grand Haven, and her great-grands tell her story of love and freedom to this day.